Okay.
Okay. Well, so I was looking through, what was that? It was the name of the website that had
My archive?
stuff, clearancejobs.com.
That's one of the people I write for, yeah.
Yeah. So you're all over the place. To just say national security, it's cybersecurity and national security.
I am.
Intelligence security. I like all of it. Yeah.
Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. I feel pretty confident, given enough lead time to be able to make a cogent discussion point on any of their national security issues, with specifics on the intelligence world, not so much on the military. And then I write for another entity called Security Boulevard, and then I write for myself as well.
Right. That's cool. One of my duties at Our Voice is I'm the editor of the written word that we display, and also we have a blog for people to write op-eds, because we're nonpartisan, but some of our fans are very partisan, so they like to write.
That's the best kind.
So it's fun because I get to try to flex my muscle of writing things in a nonpartisan way, but still get the point across for what we're trying to do, which is kind of a fine line, because to be honest, there's not too many people in the conservative space that really care too much about people who want to represent themselves who aren't already in the upper echelon of things. Like,
I understand it completely, Chris.
Yeah,
and what I try to do in my writing is be apolitical.
Yep.
And try to explain what's going on from my optic.
Okay.
As opposed to, this is what you need to do. Except with clearance jobs, they've always asked me to put solutions into my pieces. A clear community of employees for the U.S. government. So you're dealing with defense contractors, intelligence contractors, military, and the agencies as well. Okay. So generally speaking, the consumer is somebody with a security clearance, or the facility security officer. That would be somebody in charge of a facility, and they have counterintelligence requirements, et cetera.
Right.
So that's where that vein is. I tend to stay more on the counterintelligence and espionage thread over there, where elsewhere I'll talk about cybersecurity or national security with respect to various countries like Russia. And I think it was back in June 2016, I wrote a piece on the expectation that the elections were going to be of interest to a foreign nation, and explained why. And lo and behold, I was right.
Yeah, go figure.
And then in October, I wrote a piece that said that I think Kremlin prefers Hillary.
Yeah.
And in November, I wrote another piece that said, now they're scrambling.
And, I would want to point out that I looked into the history of some of your pieces, and you are not a pro-Kremlin kind of guy. I mean, you read the stuff that you've written. Well, maybe not, but you're pointing out their espionage is in full force in a couple of different states.
Oh, absolutely.
And so this isn't
having lived in Russia for a number of years.
Position. Yeah.
I kind of understand the psyche. And let me just preface by saying the Russian people and the Russian government are two separate entities.
Bingo.
Our
The
media,
United States government and the United States people are two separate entities.
I wish everybody could keep those things separate.
our media has a big problem with that. You constantly hear the Russians, and I just don't. Do they mean all of them? It just I don't understand that. If we were saying the Mexicans, it's really terrible to sort of lump everyone. Of course, they mean the Russian government, but I hear that
they're using that same logic when they try to curb the use of the BDS hashtag, right? They're trying to say that that's an affront on an entire country full of people, and really the people who are using that, as far as I understand it, they're just against the government using brutal tactics, right? But they conflate the two. So
right. So we are live now. Sorry, Facebook had a little hiccup and I had to restart. So that's pretty typical. So we are here with Chistopher Burgess, who I'm so happy to have as a guest. He's one of the few people that I could find that really wrote extensively on the Reality Winner case and really gave more detail than just kind of regurgitating the narrative about what happened. So you are an ex-CIA
officer.
And national security analyst, correct? Okay, and you worked in the CIA for 30 years, you said?
I did.
Okay.
I did. I retired as the chief of station, so my forte was running operations and collecting intelligence on behalf of the United States.
Wow, okay. And you lived in Russia, you said, for how long?
At one time I did, yes.
Okay, wow.
During my misspent youth.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Yeah, I was there early in my career.
Okay. And Chris, I'm sorry, pronounce your last name for me again.
It can either be Garu or Guru, depending
Guru.
on what part of the family you're from. So.
Oh, okay. I know I've asked you that like 3 times. Anyway, Chris does a podcast, Progressive Rampage, which is great. Check it out. So he's joining here to help me ask lots of good questions. So I want to just jump in and talk first about Reality Winner.
Sure.
And because that's what really led me to you and to your writing. So even that the first article that I found, or maybe it wasn't the first, but you actually wrote about all of the states and security companies, and you list all the ones that she wanted to subpoena. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. That was about the 3rd or 4th article in my stream. So what happened with Reality Winners is that she was arrested. She was hired a lawyer during the preparation. The trial had to be handled with classified information, so that required special rules. They had to make sure all the lawyers had access, had security clearances, and they had to put together a SCIF, which is a secure facility to hold the classified information that they were going to discuss. The court had to verify that the information was necessary for the case. And not as unusual in cases like this, her lawyers put forward a request to the court to ask every state, every government contractor that had anything to do with the topic that she revealed. Mm-hmm. And I think it came up to a number of 24 separate entities to provide their archives. And so, we're talking a little bit of data, and the court pushed back hard on and just said no. Didn't say refine your thing. They just said no. This is what you're trying to do here is create a gray mail situation where the government can't try the case for fear of something that's something additional along the lines of national security might be revealed. So they just said, we're going to stop there. Shortly after, her lawyers pled out, and so there was no trial. Indeed, according to the documents that are readily available on the national website controlled by the courts, PACER, it revealed that they were looking at 120 months in prison for her for the crimes that she had admitted to having committed. And her lawyers negotiated down and asked for 53 months, of which many of were time already served. And the government agreed, and it was done. In hindsight, we're seeing that they didn't really get her a great deal, because others who have encountered and conducted things that I view as egregious or more egregious have pled out for less time than Reality Winner. And so I'm sitting here as John Q. Public going, is our legal system any longer fair? Even if somebody has done something wrong, there should be even-handedness in how we adjudicate it. Mm-hmm. And the case I point to is the FBI special agent up in Minneapolis who released classified information to the exact same publication as Reality Winner, The Intercept. Mm-hmm. And in both instances, The Intercept took that information, they took it to the government, and they said, is this real?
Yeah,
and then
not
the government
exactly.
said, let's look at that. And they looked at it, and they said, looks pretty real to us. Would you mind not publishing this or redacting that? which they did, but they still published what they were given. But it allowed the government to say, okay, who has access to this information? Mm-hmm. And in Reality Winner's case, there were 6 people who printed out that report. 6 people in the world who had access and printed it out. That's just basic good InfoSec on sensitive information. So nothing nefarious there of, Big Brother watching you. You protect classified information. And then they looked at those 6 people, looked in their email, and there was one that was communicating with the entity that presented this to the government. So their work was done, right? Mm-hmm. 5 minutes, maybe a little longer, but it wasn't any great sleuthing that occurred mm-hmm. here. The Intercept brought it to the NSA. The NSA said, let's look at this. They looked at it. The next day, the FBI showed up. She admitted that she had printed it out, shoved it in her pantyhose to get through the random checks that might occur at the door to see if people are removing classified in an unauthorized manner. She got it home, put it in an envelope, and sent it to the Intercept. The FBI special agent up in Minneapolis did something similar. He wasn't wearing pantyhose, I assume. He took the information out, provided it to the Intercept. He pled out, and he got a few months less than Reality Winner. And I'm going, excuse me, you're a 20-year veteran in the FBI, mm-hmm. and you got less time than this contractor to NSA who served in the military, honorably, made a bad decision, released mm-hmm. sensitive information, and granted, her information stopped an entire program where his information may not have. So, I don't know the extent of the damage done. I just know that her information allowed the confirmation to the Russians that we were on the trail to how they were trying to influence the U.S. election process. And then the NSA had to do a reboot because their methodology had been exposed. Okay. Now, mind you, others had exposed the methodology long before, different mm-hmm. types of it, but this was at the programmatic level. Does that make sense to you?
Well, okay, so yes, somewhat. There's another writer, Tom McEwen, on clearance jobs, and he wrote something, what made the documents Winner stole so damaging and worth more than 5 years in prison is that they did not just reveal what the U.S. intelligence community knows about those hacking attempts. They reveal how we know that. So the sources and methods part.
Yeah, like I said, she disrupted an entire program.
Okay. So here, I want to just back up a little bit. When this story first broke, it seemed like there was a very little information that we had, and there was an instant, narrative around it that she revealed the Russian hacking.
Not at all.
Right. So, but that is what took off, and that's what got repeated over and over again. And you can count me in the camp of a major Russiagate skeptic, as I told you. And I think Chris is probably in the same camp. We just like facts. I don't want to speak for you, but I don't know if you want to elaborate on that anywhere you...
Oh, every time we go down a rabbit hole with anyone that claims they have some kind of information on Russiagate, we follow it and we see that there's nothing at the end of it. and ultimately, it's going to turn out that, they're just going to end up busting Trump on some kind of technicality involving some illegal cash transfers or something else like that, but nothing of the sort of the original intent of this. And I just have to say, I can't. Well, first of all, with Reality Winner, I can't believe that that she wasn't able to plea it down any further, like you.
Well, I blame her lawyers on that.
Yeah. But I mean, what she revealed wasn't. It was just kind of something that they already knew, right? I guess you said it was actual confirmation because they were doing human phishing scams, right? They were calling people that were in charge of these companies.
Remember, before Reality Winner, we had the shadow brokers.
Yeah. And
the shadow brokers were the compromise of the NSA operational element that they call TAO. And I wrote on that as saying it was basically NSA's toy box. And so that had been compromised. Now, once that's compromised, you go back to, that happens. So you go back to the drawing board, you create new stuff. And now that what was compromised with reality was confirmation that they were hot on the trail of unraveling the Russian apparatus.
I see.
That was targeting the U.S. and has been targeting the U.S. for many years.
Mm-hmm. Well,
that's what you would expect NSA to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's two separate things, really. The whether Trump had any collusion with Russia and whether Russia has been doing this as we have done to other countries.
So I stay away from is Trump having collusion, and I focused on are the Russians diddling with the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I come down on the side of every day.
Mm-hmm. And what is the name of the program? Sorry, I don't have it in front of me. The Russian that's been in operation for years.
What do they call it?
Yes.
They call it active measures.
Right, active measures. Okay.
And I wrote an article where I called it Deja Vu All Over Again, Russian Active Measures. And I talk about a chart, the subversion process that was published. And this article I wrote was back in December 2017. 1 year ago tomorrow. And where I go into this, all you have to do is screw up the status quo of a free nation is to borrow one false idea, and then you're off to the races. And then this chart that came out of the then KGB, because the chart dates back to the 1970s, 80s, and was put forward by a gentleman who defected. His name was Bezmenov, but he went by the alias of Thomas Schumann, and he defected to Canada. And he wrote a book about, how does Russia, then the Soviet Union, go about destabilizing countries. And so when folks read this, what I wrote, they went, well, that's what's happening now. And I said, yes, this is not new school. This is just new to you. They've been doing this for, forever, seemingly.
So, I think for a lot of us that, I don't know, I'm 47. I didn't grow up in the, it was, I kind of remember in the 80s a little bit of like, the end of the Cold War stuff, in the news, but I didn't grow up like having to hide under my desk, that stuff you hear from people a little bit older than us. And I think the whole narrative about Russia interfering, it just kind of came out of nowhere. And I think a lot of us see it as the Clinton campaigns, just quick willingness to like blame her loss on something. And, we have all this conflating constantly of, what exactly is Russian interference? We hear this stuff about Facebook ads, which is ridiculous because half of them weren't even seen until after the election. All these things, but the actual, what you're talking about is stuff that's been going on for a long time that most of us probably hadn't heard about. We assume it's there. We assume any of the major powers do this to other countries. But we have this skepticism because it seemed to come out of nowhere, and the stories like Reality Winners were just instantly attributed, it's the proof, and yet it really isn't. And so, well, after you talk a little bit more about your article, I was thinking I'd show this this chart or this graphic here of what The Intercept showed, what Reality Winner leaked to them. And
go ahead and do that.
You want me to do that now? Okay.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So, let's see. Aaron Mate of the Real News Network did a great job of, here we go, of going over this, and I'll have to scroll down a little bit here and see. Kind of showing where, okay, so we have this green line is confirmed information, yellow line is analyst judgment, gray line contextual. I don't know. I'm sure you can make more sense of this whole thing than I can. But basically, there was still just really there were spear phishing attempts, but what did that really show? So, I mean, when I heard about this, I thought, okay, either there is no evidence or they won't release all of it and show everyone because it would show things that they don't want everybody to know. I don't
Well,
know.
what it did is it allowed, if you start on the left side, it allowed the adversary, the GRU in this case, to say, okay, they know this, they know that, they know this. And just because you think your adversary knows how you might be doing business, having it confirmed to you gives you everything you need to go back to the budget folks, because all intelligence organizations run on budgets, and say, okay, we need to hit the reboot. They broke it. This is confirmed. We may have suspected it before. Now we know. And so on both sides of the equation, you had intelligence organizations scrambling once this was published.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so we really did the Russians a service by having this published, because it removed all doubt.
We helped them up their budget.
We helped them change the way they were doing business, which meant that we had to, it's like taking one step forward, 3 steps back, because now we had to relearn how they're going about their business, where we were well on their way of, if you will, compromising it.
Wow.
Okay, so I'd like, if you can, talk a little bit more about just specifically why she would be, why she wanted to subpoena the CIA, Department of Defense, all the 21 states. I assume those are all the 21.
She just wanted to bury the process, or her lawyer wanted the process to be buried in paper.
Okay.
So that was a technique.
It's a technique. It's called scorched earth, and it's often referred to as gray mail, where you're asking for so much classified information that the government will say, stop, we don't want to even prosecute it because you're not worth compromising all of this. And the court just said no to her, because it had nothing to do with her instance, which is the crime at hand was she took classified information out of a facility and then she lied to the FBI about it. That was her crime. Mm-hmm. The crime had anything to do with the content of what she took, other than it was classified.
Mm-hmm. I was always curious to me how much, even though the narrative that came out was that she proved, the Russian hacking, how much mainstream media still then buried the story. You didn't hear very much about her.
Well,
You'd think that they would have.
Details would disprove.
The story was told in quite clear terms in the court documents that included the results of interview conducted by the FBI. And that's what I used to write my piece. So my pieces were written from court documents, and thus I was trying not to put opinion on it, right, other than this is how she was caught, to explaining to folks how information is secreted out of a facility. Well, in this case, if they checked her purse, they wouldn't have found it. They would have had to check her pantyhose, and they don't do that when they do these spot searches. And so she still would have gotten it out, even if they were searching her belongings.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so one of the companies on this list is CrowdStrike. So I would like to ask your opinion about, whether the whole issue about the DNC being hacked, whether it was a hack or a leak. Do you have anything to say on that? Because it was GRU supposedly got hacked into CrowdStrike. Am I right? This is what they're saying. Those of us are some intelligence professionals, VIPs, I believe it is, and they have shown how it was more of a leak, that it had to be based on internet speeds and stuff like that. If we're talking about the DNC,
let's step back and look at what Bernie Sanders did. Bernie Sanders sued the DNC for piss poor InfoSec security. And when he sued them because information was being leaked out of the DNC, they cut him off and said, well, you can't use our information anymore. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that the DNC, we find out later on down the narrative, time passes, and now we find out that the DNC has been compromised. Shouldn't have surprised anyone, because Bernie Sanders, he raised the flag and said, hey, we've got an information security problem here.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So when Bernie Sanders tells you you've got a problem, that's not the Kremlin. That's not National Security Agency. That's one of the candidates within the DNC running for president. Now, take that as you may, every political candidate that had declared for president in, I believe it was January 2016, and both parties were advised by the FBI that the Russians were coming. Everybody knew to harden up their security. And I wrote about that in June of 2016. So there was no surprises here that they were coming. They were coming to find out. And if you look at what was compromised out of the DNC, it included the entire 200-page dossier on Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And that was published by the individual that went by the name of Chistopher 2.0. Mm-hmm. And he published that independent of what he provided to WikiLeaks. So it was kind of, he published that as his bona fides, that I actually was in there, I took what you had. And it was that information and the information from the DNC, I mean, and the compromise or the potential for nation-state compromise of Secretary of State Clinton's email server that she kept off-site, that allows me to say that the Kremlin had book on how she conducted national security and foreign affairs. They may not have had classified information, so let's give them a pass and say there was no classified on that server during the time she was Secretary of State, but they certainly had the manner in which and with whom she conducted business. And that, to me, it's like, from that you can create your playbook. Now add the DNC. Every president-elect has a few thousand plum assignments that they make. These are the political appointees. Both parties were filling out their candidates for what is called the plum book. And that, too, was compromised from the DNC. So they had the dossier on everybody that was being considered for the plum book.
I think I recall seeing that on something called DC Leaks, which was a third weirdo thing that was kind of I heard that was disinformation. That wasn't even...
Well, if they compromised the DNC servers and their infrastructure, it was there, because that's where they were doing the research on the candidates. That's where they were doing their research on the transition. They were putting their transition teams together. So, unfortunately, I don't have first person. I just know from my experience that the party puts together the list. They do the research because it's more than one candidate can do. And that's why when Trump became the candidate, the party became very close. And if you all recall the narrative of November, December 2016, it was a mad scramble because, frankly, nobody in the world thought he'd win except him.
Actually, I won $50 on that.
All right. Well, there you go.
Yeah,
now there are two people.
That's another, that's a split too, and I guess on the left or in the country, just people that, it amazes me, people that were shocked. I mean, I live in North Carolina. All I had to do was leave the blue pocket that I live in and drive across the state, and it's wallpapered with Trump signs. I mean, the same for Pennsylvania. I don't like to fly, so I drive long distances, and I drove through these flyover states, and it wasn't a surprise to me at all. I mean, to me, it was, it was a populist uprising, misguided maybe, but I think every liberal needs to read Listen Liberal, and that'll give you your answer.
Electoral college campaign.
Yeah.
And that's the key. He ran an electoral college campaign. He used big data to understand where the lever points were for swaying people who had opinions that were on the line. And he did to Clinton in 2016 what Obama did to Romney in 2008 and did to McClain in 2012. I wrote on how they smoked them both. He smoked them both in the social network arena, and that's where you touched the millennials. And frankly, Trump did a 180, and he took it. He took the advantage of the social network voice, albeit in a very pugilistic manner, to be generous. But you know what? How many billions of dollars did he get in free airtime by being pugilistic?
I know, right? To go back to the DNC, the leak there, though, what Kelly was referring to, this guy, Bill Binney, who is I think he was an NSA whistleblower, CIA whistleblower, right?
I don't know the name.
I forget which organization he was with, but he was the director of technology while he was there. And he pointed out, he uses the analogy of a water pipe as the internet flowing across the world. And in 2016, you could actually measure how fast information could be pulled off of a server and through the internet to be able to get it hacked. And they said that when they did the forensic study on that server, they found that the information flowed at the exact rate that you would get from a thumb drive, which at that point in time was too fast in 2016 for it to have gone over a network. And so with that information in the hand, that's what they're kind of spreading out there and saying that, not necessarily saying the Seth Rich person was the one who did it, but that's the conclusion a lot of people are drawing now, is that he was someone who literally handed a thumb drive off to an operative, and that the whole concept of Russia being involved was actually that other program that Reality Winner exposed, which was where the warnings were coming from the FBI.
Thank you, Chris, for
and that's
putting
why
that.
it might be so goddamn confusing. You know?
Thank you, Chris, for actually making sense of what I was trying to say. Thank you. But yeah, it wasn't just Bill Binney. It's this VIPS, Veteran Intelligence something.
Veteran Intelligence, whatever, for sanity at the end.
Yeah, right. Okay, so it's Bill Binney, and here I have it right here. Bill
Ray
Binney,
McGovern.
Ray McGovern.
Yeah.
But it's that is their position on it based on what you said, the internet speed. So, I mean, how do you want to elaborate on that? Do you have any?
I don't know them.
They're just trying to get scientific.
I don't know them. I'm hearing this for the first time.
Oh, wow.
So it is something I looked into, because when I wrote it, I was writing it based on what I was pulling out of the court docs, as well as CrowdStrike's information that they shared publicly, and what little was known. So, I'm going back here. I'm looking at this piece from June 2016. Yeah. So if you're saying somebody in 2017 or 2018 went back and said, hey, at this point in time, the internet couldn't move that fast. Okay.
And I mean, we're taking his word for it as well. It's not like he's got chalkboards on these YouTube videos whenever he gets interviewed,
Right. It was very
proven it. I just assume.
When this first came out, just trying to understand, these IT people were saying this on this side, and, they're saying this over here. But yeah, there's a good article. I guess I should have sent it to you beforehand. But that's the big debate. Was it a leak or was it a hack? So, it's CrowdStrike says, oh, we were hacked. Well, they refused to let the FBI investigate or, look at their servers. So this lack of transparency, it definitely raises suspicion.
Well, that's a business decision on CrowdStrike's part.
Yeah.
And there was nothing in there to compel them to share. The fact that the DNC chose not to share.
They're also a private company, which everyone needs to be aware of. Even the DNC fraud lawsuit brought on by the folks in Florida, I'm a named $27 donor that got into that class action. It was dismissed, but temporarily, and I think it came back again, getting re-pushed. But that exposed the fact that the DNC doesn't have to follow any guidelines in their primaries, because they're a private group. They can do what they want. So the concept of whether or not
Bernie Sanders learned.
Forced. Yeah, right. Did Bernie know this, though, is a question I'd like to ask. No one can answer.
Did he run his campaign knowing that there was a thumb on the scale? I don't know.
That's what I'd like to know. And not to disparage him, but there are quite a few people out there now calling themselves the...
Hey, let me tell you, Bernie got me out to the primaries.
Yeah, right? He woke me up.
I gave him my 17 bucks.
Right.
But I want to get back to... I just want to make a point on something you said, that there are a lot of people... You're in Seattle area, you said?
I am.
Okay. So, I mean, I live in a usually red state. So I think there are people that, whether it's, where they live or just sort of where I hate to say bubble, but that you're in, that were surprised that Trump won. And I just hear that and I'm not surprised at all. But I think when you have that view, it's really easy to go, well, wow, this couldn't have really happened. Like that, just that he got that many votes. It has to be something, it has to be Russia. It has to be this or that, because they just can't believe it. They can't wrap their heads around it. When, I could show you firsthand, I mean, how much evidence I saw.
People went to the polls in the places that counted.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think
and
it
though
was
he may have lost the popular vote, he didn't lose the popular vote where the electoral votes resided.
But it was an anti-establishment uprising.
Yeah. He was running against his own party for most of the election.
Right.
I mean, that's how he became the last one standing when he took it upon himself to destroy the 16 other candidates, and he did.
Mm-hmm.
And goofily so. He made a nickname for everybody, right?
Yeah, he was vicious.
Yeah. I just want to point out my prediction of his win wasn't because I wanted it. Of course I didn't. But it wasn't based on anything else except me looking at a ruler that I have that has all of the presidents on it since the first one and up to Bush. And then I thought about history, and the Democrats have never held a presidential position for more than 2 terms in a row. But the Republicans have had it for up to 3 terms, and one time they had it in 4 in a row. But if you just look at the D and the R, since they're never going to let a third party in until we can put them on a debate stage, it really does kind of swing like a pendulum. And so my prediction for 2020 is there is a 50% chance that Trump's going to win if he doesn't get impeached and actually kicked out of office instead of just censured or something.
Well, I'm looking at, I should have looked at it before, what I wrote in October of 2017 or 16, and it was, I believe this is a Russian gambit, masterpiece of reverse psychology, which is being consumed by U.S. media like a child consumes cotton candy. The U.S. media is not only buying it, they're serving it up to the U.S. electorate, and the unending narrative that a vote for Trump is a vote for Russia. And the reality is, Russia prefers the devil they know. I mean, that's how I ended my face. And, some would say, and I did put a disclaimer at the end. I said, I'm apolitical. I'm not, personally, I was revolted by both candidates, but I'll vote, and I encourage everyone to vote. And, I hope you don't vote for the one that you think the least of, vote for the one that you think will float your boat.
Vote your conscience.
Yeah, and make sure they earn your vote.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a big proponent for
that.
Nobody deserves it.
I did send you a link to that article about, was it a leak or a hack?
Thanks.
But maybe we could get into a little bit more of what you said about who Russia actually preferred. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. Is it possible for me to share?
Oh, yes. Just down at the bottom, you'll see a share button.
Okay.
Like 3 over. If you just scroll down, it should pop up.
It's like green with an arrow.
I see it.
Yep.
Okay, let's do that. Okay.
Probably double click it, I think.
And share?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, you see this document here? This is taken from my article on, it's deja vu all over again. Mm-hmm. And this is a page out of I told you Thomas Schumann was the alias.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look down at the very bottom, it says this chart shows the 4 stages of Soviet ideological subversion: demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. Now look along the left side, look along in the middle, and look at the right, And here we are in 2018, and this is a document from the Soviet Union.
Wow.
Which ceased to exist, for the record, 1989, 1990, right?
Depending on your narrative of how the United States conducts itself around the world, this could also show as a bit of a blueprint for that.
Right, but in this case, this is the USSR document. I don't have the US.
Right. Only speculation, folks. Sorry.
Anyway, I thought it might be of interest to your listeners and viewers, to see the document that Thomas Schumann, who was a defector from the KGB to Canada, and he spent his life educating the Western world on the art of what we call covert action in the United States. They call active measures in Russia.
Okay.
There we go.
Very interesting. So, yeah, I mean, you come from a perspective with a history of this knowledge of all of the stuff that Russia's done. As I said, this just kind of hit most of us out of nowhere. Like, what, Russia? I mean, what was the debate with Obama and Romney, where Obama makes a slick comment about the 80s, or Russia called, and I forget what it was, the 80s.
The 80s called, and they want your Russia scare back.
Something, yeah, right,
no idea.
Right, okay. But I think one of the problems we have now is we've got McCarthyism going on, basically, in a lot of the media now. So, I don't know, do you want to talk about, what's your opinion?
My opinion is this, that Russia's not the only country out there that is trying to influence politics around the world. Covert action is conducted by intelligence organizations regardless of nationality, depending upon the needs of their country. So intelligence organizations are support organizations. They support the policymakers. So when you see the U.S. covert action, understand that that isn't being thought up in Langley. It's being executed by Langley, but it's being thought up either in the president's office, the executive branch, or it's coming out of the diplomatic side of the equation, the State Department. And they're saying, we need this. Now, a lot of covert actions actually prevent wars, etc., because it allows us to influence others so that they won't do something. And that something might cause a conflagration around the world, and nobody ever knows we're there. In and out, very quiet. We're not overthrowing a government. What you're doing is preventing something bad happening. Well, in this case, all Russia wants to do at this moment in time is create chaos. And I think chaos is a great word because it reminds me of the man from U.N.C.L.E. Or Get Smart, your choice. And by creating chaos in the West, it allows breathing space for them to flex their muscles in the near geographic locations surrounding the Russian Federation and not have our attention focused on it. Ukraine is a case in point. 2 weeks ago, 3 Ukrainian ships, 2 military, 1 tug, were taken into custody by the Russians in the Azov Sea, and thus cutting off a part of the Ukraine. And they're going to continue to do that. Talk to a Georgian, and they'll talk to you all day long about how Russia is nonstop putting the pressure on them. And Russia is the GDP. Think about the GDP of Russia. Think about the GDP of Switzerland or the United States. And you're talking light years apart, right? One is $8, the other is 32, right? Russia is bankrupting. The country of Russia is being bankrupt. The president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, arguably one of the wealthiest men in the world. Last number I heard, and I can't verify it, so it's absolutely rumor, it's $40 billion. Well, that's more than I've got in my wallet today. And, the only thing that he and I have in common, we were both young whippersnappers at the same time, sitting in what is now known as St. Petersburg, working for our respective intelligence organizations. That's the only thing I know, is that we were both about the same age at the time. He did a whole lot better than I did, maybe. It depends how you look at it.
Well,
You haven't poisoned enough people yet.
Well, that's just not in my forte.
Okay, and not denying Russia does bad things, do you think that there is enough evidence, or is there evidence of Russia interfering in our election in
I think they absolutely tried to create discord so that individuals didn't know what to believe. So, interfering with the physical vote counts? No.
Right.
Doing reconnaissance to understand the demographics of voters in different areas by reaching into the state, because every state is different, reaching into their election official, reaching in there to see if they can compromise that and learn from it? Absolutely. 21 states have been identified as where they made forays into.
Actually, I want to say something about that. Have you seen any of the C-SPAN interviews with Christopher Krebs from DHS? I watched many hours of this, and he gets into this stuff about the 21 states because there was a committee, Hurd, what's his name? Hurd from Texas. They were asking for the actual evidence back from that Russia interfered, this committee. And so this was what this hearing was about. And Krebs basically says, well, there was scanning. And when pressed to explain what scanning is, and in another clip, he's saying, well, scanning is just routine. It's really nothing. Like, that goes on the internet all the time. So, I kept watching hours and hours of it, looking for what's the real evidence of that anything was done to these 21 states. What exactly was done? Because they said scanning, and then in another, on the flip side, they say, well, scanning's nothing. Scanning's just routine. Google scans, the internet all the time. So what is the real evidence? And that's what we're not seeing, or at least
I don't know that it's being shared.
Okay.
But they absolutely. According to the information that is available, I think it came out of the New York Times. The election officials explained that yes, attempts to get spear phishing and access to drives was made. I believe it was Illinois where the confirmation came out of. Where in Arizona, it was a county election official that had detected something on their network. And so scanning the internet and scraping web pages is completely different than making inquiries
spear
on a
phishing,
server that to be supporting election records.
Okay, so there may be some states where those spear phishing attempts were made, but I find it seems misleading that they're saying these 21 states were I don't know how they put it. How was that word?
Well, they're saying that it was compromised, that their security was compromised.
They didn't say data was taken.
Right.
They just say that somebody
They
looked
said
at it.
that an attempt was made. And so with an attempt being made, they're information collecting. And they're not there to compromise at this moment in time. So I gave the Russian active measures 4 key performance indicators with respect, because, I'm that kind of guy. And I'd love to share them with you. And one is to shape the U.S. election discourse and feed divisiveness. That was their first one. The second was framing the dialogue via ads and fictitious persons. There's no getting around it. They created a lot of fictitious persons that engaged, and that came out of that group up in St. Petersburg, known as I think it was the IRA, right? The Internet Research Association. And then to divide the United States and NATO. That's a strategic requirement. Their desire was to create a fission between NATO and the U.S. And in that regard, I think they failed, but they gave it a try. And then the last one was silence opposition, both foreign and domestic. And that's their own opposition. And I think the body count says everything you need to say about Russians silencing the opposition, right? We see correspondents, we see former intelligence officers all being assassinated or attempted to be assassinated. And so those are what I call the 4 key performance indicators of their active measures with respect to the elections. Frankly, I was surprised we didn't see more action at the midterms. But I think maybe there were a lot of strong messages, especially I believe the one that carried the most water was John Kelly, then Chief of Staff, making the call to the Kremlin, talking with Lavrov at the, Kelly and Pompeo, talking with Lavrov at the Foreign Ministry and making clear that, not this time. Because basically, Russia's economy is in shambles. These sanctions are hurting that country. And I wish the media, personally, I wish the media would show more of that. Because when you talk to the common man, as I have, man, it is tough to be a Russian right now.
So, but you say that which candidate did Russia prefer then?
Which candidate? For which election?
No.
In 2016.
In 2016, I believe they preferred Hillary. I think they were surprised on November 8th. And they had an oh my God moment. And they scrambled. And because intelligence organizations are adroit, there was a plan. What if? You always plan for alternatives. But I think they preferred the devil they knew than the devil they didn't know. Because as we see, Trump is a wild card. You just don't know what's going to come out of his mouth next. You don't know what he's going to do. Where even at her most offensive to Russia, she was predictable.
Okay, so the ads and everything, the troll farm, it seemed then it was more pro-Trump. So
I think it was more pro-divisiveness.
Okay.
Interesting.
I think because when you look at what they put up there, it was, what's your flavor of disagreement? Is it guns? Is it race? Is it gender? Is it sexuality? Is it where you live? Are you a coastal? Are you in a flyover state? Or are you in an affluent coastal state? Are you agrarian? Or are you industrial? They fought them all. They took both sides in every discussion.
There's a CNN clip. What's his name? Drew Griffin goes up to this lady, older lady in Florida, comes outside of her house and says, "Hey, do you know that those rallies that you were organizing were started by Russian trolls, basically online?" And she's just like, "What are you talking about?" Like, so. I want to make sure. How do I best put this? I don't deny that those, those ads were there, and those some of those groups were legitimately put on Facebook by this troll farm. What was it? The not Black Lives Matter. It was another group that they tried to sort of sound like Black Lives Matter and other things. But the fact that that we had so many people that reacted to that, they were already, you listen to this woman answer Drew Griffin, and she's like, we're already like anti-Hillary. Like, we didn't need the help.
Yeah,
like we were organizing this anyway. Like, this really didn't affect us. She's like, Russians? What are you talking about? Like, so it's almost like a moot point. Like, the sentiment was already there in the populace. And so to say that it's, that these troll farms had that much of an impact
I don't think the Russians elected Trump.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that the Russians have and continue to feed and throw as much gasoline on our country's political discourse. And as long as they can keep it at each other's throats and not being able to talk civilly to one another, as witnessed by the recent visit to the White House of the House and the Senate, Democratic leadership, and the president, and the three of them getting into it. It's enough to go around, but that stuff flows downhill, and they're just going to keep feeding the machine so that we keep at each other's throats. Because as long as we're not talking together, we're not strengthening ourselves to counter their advances elsewhere to the detriment of the globe, in my opinion.
I don't know. I think Rachel Maddow and some of our own media do a good enough job at doing all that. But I want to say that again. That I mean, I see you have all this 30 years experience. You lived in Russia. I don't. Obviously you know what you're talking about, and I think it's important for people to understand that there can be, what you describe as these efforts from Russia, but it doesn't mean that all of the narrative that we're being fed from our media, which is a lot of propaganda, saying that, conflating all these things and saying, Trump's bad business dealings are him colluding with Russia. It gets all
I think you just
jumbled
touched
together.
on a key, and that is conflation does occur.
Constantly.
And unless somebody is willing to go back to the root document and show, this is where I get my information from.
Right.
This is who I talk to, not an anonymous source in a government agency that I can't identify to you. Okay, that means you talk to the bird out on the windowsill.
People are saying,
yeah,
exactly.
Experts.
An anonymous government official. How many hundreds of thousands are there that name themselves anonymous? I don't know.
And this is the failure of our journalism right now, because I heard you say this on an interview with David Schuster, who I have utmost respect for. But you said that basically we have to get it from the horse's mouth, go straight to the source. Which, I mean, most people don't have time to watch 3 hours of C-SPAN. I usually don't either. But I did do it on that one occasion. But I mean, because it's gotten to a point where we really cannot trust our so-called news on any side.
And that's not even because of Trump, by the way. He just jumped. They noticed a trend, his people, and he grasped onto it. But we've had a problem with the news telling us the truth for quite some time. Even Jon Stewart was pointing it out back in the day.
I will admit that a news organization contacted me to come on, speak on their program on an event, and I'm en route. Their executive producer calls up and wants to make sure they understand how I'm going to answer key questions. I answer. I'm in their limo. About 5 minutes out, they call and say they canceled the segment. They took me home. No, what they went and did is they went and got somebody else that said something different. And I said, okay. And so when they called next time, I said, sorry, I don't have time.
Like, where can one go to avoid editorializing the news anymore? I mean, besides that, there's a random show on YouTube maybe that might do it for you, but even the real news eventually slips right into editorializing.
And so, when I said, look, I'm offering my opinion, so that's an opinion. It's like the back of our head. We each have one. But I'm not stating fact. I'm just giving my opinion. This is what happened. It's up to you. You're the news organization. You need to bring the facts in. And that fact-checking has been overrun by speed. The need for speed has done, in my view, journalism a disservice. There are a great number of great journalists out there that do long form. They get in there and they research it out. My own writing is short form, incident-based, and it's to learn from, so I'm always trying to educate the reader. So I'm not reporting news. I'm showing folks how not to allow whatever has happened to happen to them. And that's my angle. Kelly, I need to wrap up here in a little bit.
Oh, sure. No, go ahead. Yes, I think we are. Oh, we're at the hour mark.
We have a tendency to go forever.
We do. So, okay, well, I just want to, I guess, kind of end by saying I think it's really important for those of us that are really big Russiagate skeptics to not be completely blind to what the information you're telling us, which is, and you have years and years of experience of seeing what actually is done, these operations that are real. And but I think, maybe we have a tendency, because we're so skeptical that from all the nonsense that the media is trying to shove down our throats, that we maybe don't look at that as we should. So
there might be a smoking gun there. I don't know. I do know that the Russians are active. They will always be active if you expect them not to. As what was said back in 1929 when they wanted to put together the intelligence organization in the United States, and the then Secretary of State said, "Gentlemen, don't read each other's mail." Well, guess what? They do.
But is it any different than what we do?
Of course it is.
Oh, okay.
Of course it is. It's Russia doing it.
Oh, okay.
I have a question I wanted to ask you.
Please.
Chris. When we were watching the news and they were coming out saying that Russia definitely hacked Trump, and there's no doubt because that's what they wanted to push in the first place, they said that 17 intelligence organizations all have, and they used specifically the words high confidence, that Russia hacked the DNC server and affected the 2016 election. And then I read in an article, and I cannot pinpoint exactly who it was. I was looking for it all day, and I couldn't find it, but I know I read it. Somebody said that they had learned, it might have been a McGovern thing, that the term high confidence is used whenever they have to give a report, but they will not rubber stamp it and say they're definitely certain because they have evidence that's actionable. And so when they say high confidence, they say it's all nebulous. We know that they're hacking into stuff, so we'll just go ahead and agree with it for the sake of the news and because we all hate him. But I don't know. What's your take on that?
I have heard a Secretary of State sit at the UN and say, we have a smoking gun, right? And we went to war in Iraq.
Yeah.
So I believe
that was crap. Yeah.
Okay. So I think we need to source it to the individual. And when he says high confidence, you ask them, tell me, what does that source description mean? Because it can mean something different to each person. To me, it means, based on the body of evidence and the knowledge I know and my experience, what I'm seeing here is consistent with blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And absent something else, you want me to make a call? I'm making that call. Right. Which is different than saying hand, cookie jar, cookie in hand. 3-year-old saying, what cookie?
Yeah, that was it. That was exactly another wording of consistent with, which I feel like is, can be potentially misleading. Consistent with does not mean it is. Just
no, absolutely. And therein lies the difference between can they, could they, would they,
and did they?
The answer to all three of those are yes. But the next question is, did they? And I don't have the ability to see.
Right.
You don't have the ability to see, and so we rely on it. The law enforcement and the intelligence organizations, and frankly, they don't have an obligation to tell you or I. They have an obligation to tell our lawmakers, our representatives, that's the Congress and the Senate and the President. That's who they have an obligation to tell. I don't have a need to know. I have a lot of curiosity, but I don't have a need to know in the grand scheme of things. And it's, you can take this to other world events where you read in the newspaper, intelligence officials say, but you're not saying who the intelligence official is. You're not saying exactly what they said, nor are you producing the intelligence report. And so hearsay, if you were in a court of law, it all gets thrown out as hearsay.
Right.
But we're not in a court of law. We're in fun times, which is
media
the court
circus.
of public opinion.
Right. So you, so where? Let's say, tell people where they can find your writing. Obviously, on this clearancejobs.com.
Burgess CT on Twitter. I've got the link to all my articles right there.
Okay.
In my profile. How easy is that?
Good. They're very thorough.
I'll make sure the podcast follows you.
Very thorough. I'm sorry?
Oh, I said I'll make sure our podcast follows you.
Yep, Burgess CT.
Well, they're very thorough, but and packed full of information, but not super long, which is great.
I try to keep them under 1,000 words. As I say, bite-sized pieces.
Very good reads, though. I like your flourish.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Well,
thank you so much for having me on. I do appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much for joining us. I
All
really
right. Hope to
appreciate
do it again.
Okay, thank you.
Take care now.
All right. Good night.
Good night.